It's remarkable, really, how you manage to disappoint everyone in the room with such little effort. There, you see. She agrees with me completely. It's settled then.
I'm sorry, but you've never earned respect in this family. Rebecca didn't whisper it. She said it loud enough for the entire dinner table to go silent. My son Daniel kept his eyes on his plate and said nothing, not a word to defend me, not even a glance. I felt something inside me crack, but I still nodded as if I agreed, because sometimes silence is easier than reminding people who you used to be. 3 days later, I walked into a courtroom in downtown Chicago. And the moment I stepped inside, every single person rose to their feet. Even the judge. After my husband passed, Daniel insisted I move in with him. "It's only right, Mom," he said at the time, his voice warm, almost protective. "You shouldn't be alone." I believed him. Back then, I still saw my son as the boy who used to hold my hand, crossing the street, the one who cried when he scraped his knee and ran to me for comfort. I didn't realize how much that boy had changed, or how much I had. The house was beautiful, larger than anything I had ever lived in. A quiet suburban neighborhood outside Chicago lined with trimmed hedges and identical mailboxes. Rebecca had decorated everything in soft grays and whites like something out of a magazine. Clean. Controlled. Perfect. But from the moment I stepped inside, I felt it. I wasn't a guest. I was an inconvenience. At first it was subtle. "Amelia, could you help with the dishes tonight?" Rebecca asked on my second evening there, smiling politely, but not waiting for my answer. Of course I said yes. Then it became, "Could you handle the laundry during the week? Then it would really help if you cooked dinner a few nights." And then, no asking at all. It simply became expected. I told myself it was temporary, that families adjusted, that I should be grateful I wasn't alone. But gratitude has a way of turning into silence, and silence can slowly erase you. Rebecca ran the house like a system, everything scheduled, everything controlled. Grocery lists were typed and printed, meals were planned days in advance. Even the thermostat was locked with a code I didn't know. I didn't have a room, not really. I had the guest room, which doubled as storage. Half the closet was filled with boxes Rebecca hadn't unpacked in years. My clothes stayed neatly folded in a single drawer. I tried not to take up space. I woke up early before anyone else just to have a moment to myself. I would sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and watch the sun rise over the quiet street. Those few minutes, they were mine. Until Rebecca started waking up earlier, too. "You don't need to use so much coffee," she said one morning, glancing at my cup. "It's expensive." I apologized. "I don't even like coffee that much." Daniel noticed none of it. Or maybe he chose not to. He left early for work most days, tie half-knotted phone pressed to his ear. When he came home, Rebecca would greet him at the door, smiling, taking his coat, asking about his day. I would be in the kitchen, finishing dinner. "Smells good," he'd say, not looking at me as if the meal had prepared itself. We used to talk for hours, Daniel and I. After his father died, we had leaned on each other. I thought that bond would last. But somewhere along the way, I became background noise. Dinner conversations rarely included me. Rebecca talked about her friends, her plans, her opinions. Daniel nodded, agreed, laughed. If I tried to add something small, even just a memory or a thought, there would be a pause. A shift in the air. And then Rebecca would redirect the conversation as if I hadn't spoken. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then I stopped speaking altogether. The hardest part wasn't the work. I've never been afraid of hard work. It was the way I became invisible in my own son's life. One afternoon, I overheard Rebecca on the phone in the living room. She didn't know I was nearby. I swear it's like having an extra nearby. I swear it's like having an extra responsibility, she said, her voice low but sharp. She doesn't contribute anything, just takes up space. I froze in the hallway, my hand still on the edge of the wall. She's Daniel's mother, I get that, a responsibility, she said, her voice low but sharp. She doesn't contribute anything, just takes up space. I froze in the hallway, my hand still on the edge of the wall. She's Daniel's mother, I get that, Rebecca continued. But honestly, she never really did anything with her life. No real career, no accomplishments. I don't even know what she used to do. I felt something twist deep inside my chest. Not anger, something quieter, heavier, erasure. Because the truth was, I had done something. I had done a great deal, but I had spent years learning how to bury it. I stepped back quietly before she could see me, returned to the kitchen, picked up a dish towel, and began wiping a counter that was already clean. That became my routine. Clean what's already clean. Fix what isn't broken. Stay where I'm placed. That evening, Daniel came home later than usual. Rebecca greeted him with her usual warmth, her voice light, affectionate. Long day, she asked. You have no idea, he sighed, loosening his tie. Dinner was already on the table. I had made his favorite roasted chicken with herbs the way I used to when he was younger. He sat down, took a bite, and smiled. This is great, he said. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope. But then, Rebecca laughed softly. Well, she has a lot of free time, she said. It's the least she can do. The moment disappeared. Daniel didn't correct her. He didn't even look at me. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the house. The soft footsteps upstairs, the distant sound of a television. I thought about leaving. The idea had crossed my mind before. But where would I go? This was my son's home. My family. Wasn't it? I turned my head slightly and looked at the small nightstand beside me. A single drawer. Inside it, hidden beneath folded scarves, was something I hadn't touched in years. A key. It belonged to a locked box I had carried with me through every move, every chapter of my life. A box I had promised myself I would never open again, because opening it meant remembering, and remembering meant facing a version of myself I had tried very hard to forget. I closed my eyes. Upstairs, I heard laughter. Rebecca's voice bright and easy. Daniel laughed too. For a moment, it sounded like a different life. A life I wasn't part of, and maybe hadn't been for a long time. It didn't happen all at once. Disrespect rarely does. It builds quietly, layer by layer, until one day you realize you are no longer being seen as a person, but as something less. Rebecca had a way of smiling when she said things that cut deep. That was the part that made it harder to explain. If she had yelled, insulted me outright, perhaps Daniel would have noticed. Perhaps even I would have reacted differently. But Rebecca was careful, calculated. She never crossed a line in a way that could easily be pointed out. Instead, she blurred it just enough that if I ever spoke up, I would sound unreasonable. One Sunday afternoon, she invited a group of her friends over for brunch. I had spent the entire morning preparing. Fresh fruit arranged in glass bowls, homemade muffins still warm from the oven, eggs, bacon coffee, everything laid out perfectly. I even ironed the tablecloth, smoothing out every crease with a kind of quiet pride I didn't fully understand. Maybe I just wanted to feel useful. Maybe I wanted someone, anyone, to notice. Rebecca walked in just as I was placing the last plate on the table. She glanced around, her eyes scanning every detail. Then she smiled. "Oh, this actually looks decent," she said lightly. Actually, as if she hadn't expected it, as if I had somehow exceeded a very low expectation. "Thank you," I replied softly. Her friends arrived shortly after, 3 women all dressed neatly, carrying the effortless confidence of people who had never had to question their place in a room. They greeted Rebecca with warmth, laughter filling the house almost instantly. I stayed in the kitchen at first, listening to their voices drift in from the living room. "Oh my God, Rebecca, your house is stunning. You've done such a beautiful job decorating. I swear everything looks like it's out of a catalog." Rebecca laughed modestly. "Oh, you know I try." There was a pause. Then one of the women asked, "So who helped you with all the food?" "Catering. I don't know why, but I waited. Just for a second. I waited to hear my name." Rebecca's voice came smooth and easy. "Oh no, Daniel's mom handled it." A small silence followed. I could almost picture their expressions, curious, maybe slightly surprised. "Oh, she cooks?" another woman asked. Rebecca laughed again, a little sharper this time. "Well, she has a lot of time on her hands." The women chuckled politely. I stood there, my hand resting on the edge of the counter, feeling that same quiet weight settle in my chest again. Not anger. Not yet. Just shrinking. When I finally brought the food out, Rebecca introduced me with a brief wave of her hand. "This is Amelia," she said. "Daniel's mom." No warmth, no pride, no connection, just a label. I smiled politely and nodded. "Nice to meet you," I said. They smiled back kind enough, but their attention quickly returned to Rebecca. I sat at the edge of the table, slightly apart from the group. The conversation moved quickly. Vacations, careers, investments, social events. A world I used to understand once upon a time. At one point, one of the women turned to me. "So, Amelia," she said, her tone friendly but distant. "What did you do before you retired?" The question caught me off guard. For a moment, I hesitated. I could feel Rebecca's eyes on me, waiting, watching, measuring. "I worked for a while," I said carefully. It was the truth, just not the whole truth. "What kind of work?" the woman asked. Before I could answer, Rebecca spoke. "Oh, nothing too serious," she said with a small shrug. She mostly stayed at home, took care of Daniel. There it was, neatly packaged, easily understood, completely untrue. I felt something stir inside me then, a flicker, small but unmistakable, a memory of a different version of myself. One who would have corrected that statement without hesitation. One who would have spoken clearly, confidently, without asking for permission. But that version of me had been quiet for a long time. So instead, I smiled. "Yes," I said softly. "I took care of my family." The conversation moved on. Rebecca continued speaking, her voice filling the space, her presence dominating the room. Daniel joined them halfway through, greeting everyone warmly, completely at ease. He didn't notice the way I sat slightly apart. Or maybe he did and chose not to see it. At one point, Rebecca placed a hand on his arm, laughing at something one of her friends had said. "You're lucky," the friend teased him. "You married well." Daniel smiled. "I know," he said. I looked down at my plate. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't even sadness, not in the way people usually think of it. It was something quieter. The realization that somewhere along the way, I had become invisible, not just to Rebecca, but to my own son. Later, as the guests were leaving, one of the women turned back to me. "The muffins were lovely," she said kindly. Thank you, I replied. Rebecca stepped in before I could say anything more. She's good at simple things, she said, smiling. Simple things. I nodded again, as if I agreed, as if that was enough. That evening, after the house had returned to its usual quiet, I stood alone in the kitchen washing dishes. The water ran warm over my hands, the repetitive motion almost comforting in its familiarity. Plate after plate, cup after cup, everything cleaned, everything returned to its place, just like me. From the living room, I could hear Rebecca and Daniel talking. You really need to set boundaries, Rebecca was saying. This can't go on forever. I know, Daniel replied, his voice low. I just don't want to upset her. She's already comfortable, Rebecca said. Too comfortable. I stopped moving. She doesn't contribute anything, Daniel, Rebecca continued. At some point, you have to ask yourself, what does she actually bring to this household? There was a long pause, long enough for hope to exist, long enough for me to believe just for a second that my son might say something different, that he might remember who I was, who I had been. But then I know, Daniel said quietly. And just like that, something inside me shifted. Not broken, not shattered, just changed. Because for the first time, I wasn't hearing Rebecca's words. I was hearing his. There are some memories you don't forget. You don't revisit them either. You simply lock them away. For years, I told myself it was the right thing to do. That the past belonged exactly where I had left it, sealed, distant, irrelevant to the life I had chosen afterward. But that night, after hearing Daniel's quiet agreement from the living room, something shifted inside me. Not anger. Not even heartbreak. Clarity. I didn't sleep much. The house was too still, too heavy with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. Around 3 a.m., I finally sat up in bed. The room was dark except for a faint glow from the street lamp outside. Shadows stretched across the walls, familiar and empty at the same time. For a long moment, I just sat there, listening to my own breathing. Then slowly, I reached for the nightstand drawer. My hand hesitated before opening it. Not because I didn't know what was inside, but because I did. The drawer slid open with a soft sound. Inside, beneath a stack of neatly folded scarves, was the key. Small. Metal. Ordinary. Except it wasn't. I held it in my hand for a moment, feeling its weight. Light, but somehow heavier than anything else in that room. It had followed me through every chapter of my life. Every move, every decision, even the ones I tried to forget. I stood up quietly and crossed the room. In the corner, partially hidden behind an old suitcase, was the box. Dark wood, slightly worn at the edges, locked, untouched. For years. I knelt down in front of it, the key still in my hand. There was a time when this box meant everything to me, and then it became something I couldn't bear to open. Because inside it wasn't just paper. It was proof of who I had been, of what I had chosen to leave behind, for Daniel, for our family, for a life I believed mattered more. I closed my eyes for a moment, and then I unlocked it. The click was soft, but it echoed in the quiet room like something much louder. I lifted the lid slowly. The smell of old paper rose immediately, faint familiar. Inside were folders, documents, files carefully arranged just as I had left them. Everything preserved, everything waiting. My fingers brushed over the top folder before I picked it up. The name on the tab was still clear. Amelia Thornton, followed by a title I hadn't seen in years. Senior Counsel. I let out a slow breath. I had spent so long convincing myself that title didn't matter anymore, that it belonged to a different version of me. But holding it again, it didn't feel distant. It felt real. I opened the folder. Inside were case files, thick detailed, marked with notes in my own handwriting. Legal arguments, evidence summaries, transcripts. The language came back to me immediately. Precise, structured, alive. For a moment, I wasn't standing in a quiet guest room in my son's house. I was back in a courtroom, standing at the front, speaking with confidence. Being heard, being respected. I turned the page slowly, and then I saw it. The case. The one that changed everything. The one I had never spoken about again. I sat back slightly, the folder still open in my hands. That case had been complicated, not just legally, personally. It had involved people with influence, power, money, and consequences that extended far beyond the courtroom. I had been at the center of it, not just as a lawyer, as a decision maker, as someone who had chosen truth over comfort. I remembered the long nights, the pressure, the warnings, some subtle, some not. I remembered being told to step back, to stay quiet, to protect myself. But I hadn't. And in the end, the case had set a precedent, changed the way certain financial crimes were prosecuted. It had been called landmark, historic, important. And then I walked away, not because I couldn't continue, but because I chose not to. Daniel was young at the time. His father's health was already declining. Our life was shifting in ways I couldn't control. So I made a decision, one I never regretted. At least, not until recently. I closed the folder gently and placed it back in the box. But I didn't close the lid. Not yet. Because something else caught my attention. A smaller envelope tucked beneath the files. I frowned slightly and reached for it. It wasn't labeled. Carefully, I opened it. Inside was a letter, old but preserved. I unfolded it slowly. The signature at the bottom made my breath catch. Michael Hayes. I hadn't thought about him in years. He had been one of the few people who truly understood the weight of that case. A colleague, a friend, someone who had stood beside me when it mattered most. The letter was brief. A thank you, a recognition of what we had accomplished, and a line that stayed with me long after I first read it. If the truth ever needs a voice again, I hope you remember that yours once changed everything. I stared at those words now, the silence of the room pressing in around me. The truth needs a voice again. A strange thought crossed my mind. Why now? Why after all these years had Michael reached out? Why had my name resurfaced? I reached back into the envelope. There was something else inside. A more recent document. My hands moved slower this time. Carefully, deliberately, I unfolded it. And there it was. A formal notice. A court summons. My name printed clearly at the top, Amelia Thornton. Requested to appear as a key witness. My heart began to beat a little faster. I read further. The case number, the details, and then a name. Not mine, not Michael's, but one that made everything inside me go still. Thornton Holdings. I stared at the page, my vision narrowing slightly as the meaning settled in. Thornton Holdings wasn't just any company. It was Rebecca's family business. The same company she spoke about with pride. The same company that funded the house I was living in. The samey company she believed made her. It was Rebecca's family business. The same company she spoke about with pride. The same company that funded the house I was living in. The same company she believed made her untouchable. I lowered the paper slowly. Suddenly, the past didn't feel distant anymore. It felt connected, present, dangerously close. Because whatever was happening in that courtroom wasn't just about an old case. It was about something unfolding now. Something that had reached into my present life, into my family. And for the first time in years, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think before. I wasn't being called back by accident. The next morning felt different. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. Rebecca was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. She stood by the counter, scrolling through her phone, a cup of coffee in her hand, the same coffee she had once told me not to waste. She didn't look up when I entered. "Make sure you wipe down the counters today," she said casually. "We have guests coming tonight." Guests. Again. I nodded, but this time something inside me didn't shrink. It didn't resist either. "It's simply, make sure you wipe down the counters today," she said casually. "We have guests coming tonight." Guests. Again. I nodded, but this time something inside me didn't shrink. It didn't resist either. It simply observed. "What time?" I asked quietly. Rebecca glanced at me surprised, as if she hadn't expected a question. 7? She said. "Some people from the company, important people." From the company. I felt the words settle into place. Thornton Holdings. I turned slightly, reaching for a glass from the cabinet, my movements slow controlled. "I'll make dinner," I said. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Well, yes," she replied. "That would be helpful?" Helpful. I almost smiled. The day passed like so many others, cleaning, preparing, moving quietly through a house that never quite felt like mine. But beneath the routine, something was different. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just reacting. I was thinking, watching, connecting pieces I had ignored before. By the time evening arrived, the house looked immaculate. The dining table was set, candles placed carefully, every detail exactly as Rebecca would have wanted. She walked through the room once inspecting. "Good," she said. "At least this part is handled." Daniel came home shortly after his tie loosened his expression, tired but alert. "Big night?" he asked Rebecca. She smiled, slipping easily into the role she played so well. "Very," she said. "These are key people. Investors." Investors! I stayed in the background, placing the final dishes on the table. No one asked what I thought. No one asked if I understood. But I did. Better than either of them realized. The guests arrived right on time. 3 men and 1 woman, all dressed sharply, carrying the quiet confidence of people used to being listened to. Rebecca greeted them warmly, her voice polished, effortless. "Welcome," she said. "Please come in." Daniel joined her, shaking hands, smiling. I remained near the kitchen entrance, invisible by design. At first, everything followed the same pattern: drinks, laughter, polite conversation. But then, as they moved into the dining room, something shifted. One of the men, a tall figure with silver hair and a measured expression, paused as his eyes landed on me. Not in passing, not casually. He looked at me, really looked. For a moment, I held his gaze, and in that moment, I saw it. Recognition. Faint. Uncertain. But there. He didn't say anything immediately, just nodded slightly before taking his seat. I felt my heartbeat quicken, not with fear, but with something else. Awareness. Dinner began. Rebecca led the conversation as always, speaking about growth expansion, future plans for the company. Thornton Holdings is entering a new phase, she said confidently. We're restructuring certain divisions, focusing on long-term profitability. The words flowed smoothly, rehearsed, impressive. But as she spoke, I noticed something else. The silver-haired man wasn't fully engaged. He listened, yes, but his attention drifted. Occasionally, his eyes would flick back to me, as if trying to place a memory he couldn't quite reach. Daniel spoke next, adding numbers projections, reinforcing Rebecca's points. They worked well together. A team, a unit, at least on the surface. I moved quietly around the table, refilling glasses, clearing plates. And then it happened. A simple moment. One of the guests turned to me. "This is excellent," he said, gesturing to the meal. "You must have a background in hospitality." Before I could respond, Rebecca laughed lightly. "Oh no," she said. "She just has a lot of time." The table chuckled politely, but the silver-haired man didn't. His eyes remained on me. Sharp now, focused. "What's your name?" he asked. The question cut through the room. Rebecca hesitated just for a fraction of a second, but I answered before she could. "Amelia," I said. He repeated it softly. "Amelia." Something shifted in his expression, and then the question cut through the room. Rebecca hesitated just for a fraction of a second, but I answered before she could. "Amelia," I said. He repeated it softly. "Amelia." Something shifted in his expression. And then, "Amelia Thornton?" he asked. The room went quiet. Rebecca's smile faltered. Daniel looked up confused. I met the man's gaze steadily. "Yes," I said. The silence deepened. The man leaned back slightly, studying me in a way that felt different. Not dismissive. Not casual. Respectful. "I thought so," he said slowly. Rebecca let out a small, uncertain laugh. "I think you might be mistaken," she said quickly. "She's just—" "I'm not mistaken," he interrupted gently but firmly. His eyes never left mine. I remember that name. The air in the room changed. Subtle, but undeniable. Daniel frowned slightly. "Do you know my mother?" he asked. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked me a question. "One case," he said. "Years ago. Financial misconduct. Set a federal precedent." My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the serving tray. I could feel Rebecca watching me now, closely, carefully. The man continued. "You stood alone on that one," he said. "Didn't you?" The past wasn't buried anymore. It was here, at the table, in front of everyone. And for the first time since arriving in this house, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. I set the tray down slowly. "Yes," I said. Just one word, but it carried more weight than anything I had said in years. Rebecca's expression shifted, confusion first, then something sharper. Daniel looked between us, trying to understand. I don't get it," he said. "Mom, what is he talking about?" I turned to him, really looked at him. At my son, the man who had said just the night before that I contributed nothing. And for a moment I considered explaining everything, telling him the truth, all of it. But I didn't, not yet. Because something told me he wasn't ready to hear it. Not here, not like this. The silver-haired man nodded slightly as if confirming something to himself. "I had a feeling," he said. "It's been a long time." Rebecca forced a smile. "Well," she said, her voice tight, "I'm sure it's just a coincidence. Amelia hasn't worked in years." The man didn't respond. But his silence spoke louder than anything she could say. Dinner continued, but nothing felt the same. The balance had shifted. Just slightly, just enough. And as I stood there, watching it all unfold, one thought became clear in my mind. The past wasn't coming back quietly. It was beginning to reveal itself. And this time, I wasn't going to hide from it. The house felt too small after that dinner, not physically, but emotionally. As if the walls themselves had heard something they weren't meant to, and now held on to it, pressing it back into the air every time I took a breath. Rebecca barely spoke to me after the guests left. She moved through the house with sharp, efficient motions, clearing glasses, stacking plates. Her jaw set tighter than usual. Daniel followed her quietly, glancing at me once or twice, his expression uncertain, confused. For the first time in years, he didn't seem entirely sure of what he believed. I stayed in the kitchen, finishing what I had started, washing, drying, putting everything back where it belonged. Routine. Control. But inside, my thoughts were anything but steady. Amelia Thornton. The name had been spoken out loud, recognized, and not by accident. The silver-haired man hadn't been guessing. He had known. That changed everything. When I finally finished and turned off the kitchen light, I noticed Rebecca standing in the hallway, waiting. Her arms were crossed, her posture rigid. "We need to talk," she said. Her tone was calm. Too calm. I nodded. Of course. Daniel appeared behind her, lingering slightly to the side, as if unsure whether he should be part of the conversation or not. Rebecca didn't give him that option. "Stay," she said to him without looking away from me. He did. We moved into the living room. Rebecca remained standing. Daniel sat on the edge of the couch. I chose the chair across from them, folding my hands in my lap. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, Rebecca exhaled slowly. "Let's clear something up," she said. "What exactly was that? Tonight," I met her gaze. "What do you mean?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Don't do that," she said. "Don't pretend you don't understand. That man, he clearly thought you were someone important." There it was again. Important. A word she had never once used for me before. I tilted my head slightly. "Did that bother you?" I asked. Her expression tightened. "This isn't about me," she snapped. "It's about honesty. You've been living in this house for months, Amelia, and somehow we're just now finding out that you might have had some kind of career." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Mom," he said softly. "Is it true? Were you a lawyer or something?" "Something." I looked at him for a long moment, at the uncertainty in his eyes, at the quiet distance that had grown between us. I said simply. The room went still. Rebecca blinked. Daniel frowned. "A lawyer," he repeated. "You never told me that." "I didn't think it mattered," I replied. Rebecca let out a short, incredulous laugh. "It matters now," she said, "especially if people outside this house seem to recognize you for it." I said nothing, because she wasn't wrong. It did matter now. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Mom, what kind of lawyer?" he asked. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to answer, but because I understood something he didn't. Once I started explaining, there would be no going back. "Corporate litigation," I said finally. "Financial cases." Rebecca's posture shifted subtly. Not much, but enough. "What kind of cases?" she pressed. Her voice was sharper now, more focused. I held her gaze. Complicated ones, I said. That wasn't the answer she wanted. I could see it immediately. Her patience thinned. Amelia, she said, her tone tightening. This isn't a guessing game. That man clearly recognized your name. He mentioned a federal case. That's not nothing. No, I agreed. It's not. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, visibly struggling to process everything. So why didn't you ever say anything he asked? I mean, all these years, the question landed heavier than the others. Because it wasn't about curiosity. It was about something deeper. Regret. I looked at him, really looked this time. Because I chose not to, I said quietly. Rebecca shook her head. That doesn't make sense, she said. People don't just walk away from something like that. Not unless... She stopped herself, but the implication hung in the air. Unless you failed, unless you had no choice, unless you weren't good enough. I didn't correct her. Not yet. Daniel leaned forward again. Was it because of Dad, he asked? I paused, then nodded once. Yes. That part at least was true. Rebecca sighed, clearly frustrated. Well, whatever the reason, she said, you need to understand how this looks. I raised an eyebrow slightly. How what looks... This, she said, gesturing between us. Tonight, that conversation, you made it seem like you've been hiding something. And frankly, I don't like surprises, especially ones that involve my business contacts. My business contacts. There it was. Not not family. Hers. I didn't intend to surprise anyone, I said calmly. Rebecca stepped closer, her voice lowering. Then explain it, she said, because right now, it feels like you've been deliberately misleading us. Misleading. The word almost made me smile. I had spent months being diminished, dismissed, erased, and now suddenly I was too much. Too unknown. Too unpredictable. I told you what I did, I said evenly. You just didn't think it was worth asking about. Daniel winced slightly. Rebecca's expression hardened. That's not fair, she said. No, I replied quietly. It isn't. Silence settled between us again. Thicker this time. More uncomfortable. Rebecca crossed her arms tighter. Well, she said, after a moment, I don't like uncertainty. Especially not when it involves people who could impact my company. Her company. Her control. Her world. I understand, I said. And I did. More than she realized. Daniel looked between us, his voice softer now. Mom, is this going to affect anything? He asked. The question lingered. Not just about the past, but about what was coming. I thought about the letter, the summons, the name printed on that document, Thornton Holdings. I could feel the truth pressing closer now, waiting, but I wasn't ready to say it. Not yet. No, I said finally. Not yet. Rebecca frowned slightly at my choice of words. Not yet, she repeated. I held her gaze. Good night, Rebecca, I said. Then I stood up. For the first time since I had moved into that house, I ended the conversation. Not her, not Daniel. Me. I walked past them both, my steps steady, my posture straight. And as I reached the hallway, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not fear, not hesitation. Control. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting to their version of me. I was returning to my own. Behind me, I could hear Rebecca speaking in a low voice. What does she mean, not yet? Daniel didn't answer. And neither did I. Because the truth was, the moment they were so desperate to understand was already on its way. I didn't open the box again that night. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what was inside it. And more importantly, what it meant. The past wasn't something I had left behind. It was something I had chosen to put away. There's a difference. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not out of habit this time, out of purpose. The house was still quiet, wrapped in that fragile silence before the day begins. I moved carefully, almost instinctively, as if I were stepping into a role I hadn't played in a long time. I made coffee, not because I needed it, but because I could. And for once, I didn't measure how much I used. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place I had sat every morning for months, but everything felt different. The air, the light, even the silence. Because now I wasn't sitting there as someone waiting to be tolerated. I was sitting there as someone who understood exactly what was coming next. Footsteps broke the quiet. Rebecca. She walked into the kitchen, her movements sharp, deliberate. She stopped when she saw me already sitting there. "You're up early?" she said. I met her gaze calmly. "So are you?" She didn't smile. Not this time. Instead, she walked to the counter, poured herself coffee, and turned to face me. "We're not done talking about last night," she said. "I didn't think we were," I replied. She studied me for a moment, longer than usual, as if trying to figure out what had changed. "You left things unclear," she said finally. "And I don't like unclear." "I know," I said. That seemed to irritate her more than anything else. Rebecca was used to control, to certainty, and right now, I was giving her neither. "Then explain it," she pressed. "Who are you really, Amelia?" The question hung in the air. Simple, direct, and yet impossible to answer in a single sentence. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "I already told you I said. I was a lawyer. That's not enough," she snapped. "People don't react like that over just a lawyer." I tilted my head. "No," I agreed. "They don't." Her eyes sharpened. "So," she demanded. I held her gaze, and for a moment I considered telling her everything. The case, the impact, the choices I made. But something stopped me. Not fear, not hesitation, timing, because the truth wasn't just something to be told. It was something to be revealed, and that moment wasn't here, not in this kitchen, not like this. "You'll understand soon enough," I said quietly. Rebecca's expression hardened immediately. "I don't like games," she said. "Neither do I," I replied. Before she could respond, Daniel walked in. He looked tired, more than usual, like he hadn't slept much either. "Morning," he said, his voice uncertain. "Good morning," I replied. Rebecca didn't greet him. Her attention remained fixed on me. "Your mother seems to think we're in the middle of some kind of mystery," she said to him. Daniel frowned slightly. "Mom," he said, looking at me. I met his eyes. "Daniel," I said gently, "have you ever wondered why I never talked about my past?" He hesitated. "I guess I just assumed there wasn't much to say," he admitted. The words were honest, and they hurt more than anything Rebecca had said. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. He had never asked, and I had never told. "I made that choice," I said, "for a reason." "What reason?" he asked. I looked down at my hands for a moment, then back at him. You, I said. He blinked. Me. Yes, I said. You. Your father. Our family. Rebecca let out a quiet, impatient breath. That still doesn't explain why people in a courtroom would recognize you, she said. No, it didn't. And I knew that. But again, timing. Daniel leaned against the counter, watching me more closely now. There's more, isn't there? He said. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I stood up slowly. I have somewhere to be today, I said. Rebecca's head snapped slightly. Where? She asked. I picked up my cup, rinsed it, and set it in the sink. Downtown, I said. For what? She pressed. I turned to face her. For something important. The word lingered between us. Important. The same word she had questioned just the night before. Rebecca crossed her arms again. Is this about that case, she asked. I didn't confirm it, but I didn't deny it either. Daniel straightened slightly. Mom, are you going to court? He asked. I met his gaze. Yes, I said. Silence. Heavy. Charged. Rebecca's expression shifted this time, not just irritation. Concern. Real concern. What case? She asked quickly. What are you involved in? I held her gaze, and for the first time, I saw something new in her eyes. Not control, not superiority, uncertainty. You'll find out, I said. She took a step forward. That's not good enough, she said sharply. If this involves my company, it does, I said. The words landed like a stone. Rebecca froze. Daniel looked between us, confused. What do you mean, he asked. I didn't answer right away. Because now, there was no more avoiding it. The case I'm being called into, I said slowly, involves Thornton Holdings. Rebecca's face drained of color. Daniel's eyes widened. That's her family's company, he said. I know, I replied. The room felt smaller, tighter. Like the air itself had shifted. Rebecca shook her head slightly. No, she said. That doesn't make sense. But I could see it in her eyes. The moment realization began to take hold. What kind of case? She asked, her voice lower now. Careful. Controlled. But no longer confident. I took a breath. Financial misconduct, I said. Daniel looked stunned. Rebecca didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak. And in that silence, everything changed. Because for the first time since I had stepped into that house, the balance of power had shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but undeniably. And as I turned to leave the kitchen, picking up my coat, I felt it fully. Not just control, not just clarity, authority. Because the truth wasn't just coming, it had already begun. And this time, I wasn't the one being judged. The drive into downtown Chicago felt longer than usual, not because of traffic, but because of everything that now sat between me and the place I was going. I hadn't been back in years. Not to this part of the city. Not to that building. Not to that version of myself. The courthouse stood exactly as I remembered, tall, imposing, carved from stone, that seemed to carry the weight of every decision ever made inside it. For a moment, I sat in my car, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, just looking at it. There was a time when walking into that building felt like stepping into purpose. Now it felt like stepping into truth, and truth I had learned was rarely comfortable. I took a slow breath and stepped out of the car. The air was crisp, carrying that faint hum of the city already alive with movement. People passed by me without a second glance. Lawyers, clerks, officers, all moving with intention. I used to be one of them. I walked toward the entrance, each step steady, measured, familiar. Inside the security checkpoint was the same. The polished floors, the quiet echoes of footsteps, the distant murmur of voices layered beneath everything. Routine, structure, order. A uniformed officer nodded at me as I approached. "Morning," he said. "Good morning," I replied. I placed my bag on the scanner, stepping through without hesitation. And as I did, something shifted inside me again. Not dramatically, but unmistakably, because I wasn't entering this building as a visitor. I was returning. The hallway beyond stretched long and bright-lined with doors that led to rooms where lives changed every day. I knew exactly where I was going. Courtroom 3, B. My steps slowed slightly as I approached it, not out of fear, but awareness, because once I walked through that door, everything would begin. The past, the present, the truth. Rebecca was so desperate to control. I paused just outside. Voices filtered through the door, low professional focused. The case had already begun. Of course it had. They hadn't been waiting for me. They had been proceeding without me. Until now. I reached for the handle and pushed the door open. The sound was subtle, but the effect immediate. Every head in the room turned. Every conversation stopped. Every movement paused. And then something happened that Daniel would have never believed. People stood, not all at once, but one by one. First a man near the front, then another, then a woman at the side, until slowly the entire room rose to its feet. Respect, recognition, memory. I stood there just inside the doorway, feeling the weight of it not as something new, but as something returned. The judge looked up from the bench. His expression shifted the moment he saw me. "Ms. Thornton," he said. Not a question, a confirmation. I stepped forward. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. My voice was steady, clear, unshaken. The room remained standing for a moment longer before the judge gestured for everyone to sit. "Thank you for appearing," he said. "We were beginning to wonder if you would I apologize for the delay," I said. "I was not properly informed of the timeline." A faint ripple moved through the courtroom. Subtle, but noticeable, because that wasn't just a statement. It was a signal. Someone had tried to keep me out, or at least delay me. The judge nodded. "You're here now," he said. "That's what matters." I took my place, not in the audience, not at the back, but at the witness stand, exactly where I belonged. As I settled in, I allowed myself a brief glance across the room. And there they were, representatives from Thornton Holdings, 3 of them, well-dressed, composed, watching me closely. Among them, a familiar face, Rebecca's older brother, Charles Whitmore. I hadn't expected him to be here personally. But of course, this wasn't just any case. This was their company, their reputation, their control, and now their problem. Charles's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see it beneath the surface. Recognition, and something else. Concern. The proceedings resumed quickly. Formalities, introductions, context. But beneath all of it, one truth remained clear. My presence had changed the room. The lead prosecutor stepped forward. "Ms. Thornton," he began. Can you confirm your previous involvement in federal financial litigation? I can, I said. And your role in the precedent-setting case referenced earlier in these proceedings. I led it. I replied. No hesitation, no softening, just truth. A quiet murmur spread through the room. Even now, years later, the weight of that statement hadn't faded. The defense attorney's sharp control stood next. Ms. Thornton, he said, isn't it true that you left your legal career shortly after that case? It is, I said, and that you have not actively practiced law in years. That is also true. He nodded slightly, as if building something. Then why, he asked, should this court consider your testimony relevant to current proceedings? A fair question, on the surface, but I knew exactly what he was doing. Undermining, reframing, trying to reduce me to something less. I met his gaze. Because the methods used in this case, I said calmly, are not new. The room stilled again. They are evolved, I continued, refined, but at their core, they follow the same structure I exposed years ago. The prosecutor stepped in. And would you say, Ms. Thornton, that those methods are present within Thornton Holdings' financial practices? I didn't look at Rebecca's brother. I didn't look at anyone but the judge. Yes, I said. One word. Clear. Definitive. Unavoidable. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before. Because this wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was confirmation. From someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. The defense shifted slightly. The tension in the room tightened, and in that moment, I understood something completely. Rebecca had believed power came from control, from image, from perception, but real power came from truth, and truth was no longer on her side. As the questioning continued, I answered everything, calmly, precisely, without hesitation. Because I wasn't guessing, I wasn't speculating, I was remembering, and every answer I gave brought the past and present closer together, piece by piece, until the full picture began to emerge. And as I sat there in that courtroom under the same lights I had once stood beneath years ago, I realized something with absolute clarity. I had never lost who I was. I had simply been waiting for the moment to be her again. The courtroom didn't breathe the same way after that. Before it had been controlled, structured, predictable, contained within the quiet rhythm of legal procedure. Now it felt alive, tense, watching. Because truth has a way of doing that. It changes the air. The prosecutor stepped forward again. His tone measured, but noticeably more confident now. Ms. Thornton, he said, can you explain to the court how the financial structure used by Thornton Holdings compares to the system you previously exposed? I folded my hands lightly on the stand. There was no hesitation, because this wasn't theory. This was familiarity. The structure is layered, I began. On the surface, it appears legitimate multiple subsidiaries, diversified accounts, complex asset flows. The judge nodded slightly, listening closely. But beneath that, I continued, there are patterns, repetitions, transactions that don't align with declared business activity. The defense attorney shifted. Objection, he said. Speculation. The judge raised a hand slightly. Overruled for now, he said. Continue. I inclined my head. These patterns, I said, are not accidental. They are designed to obscure movement, to make it difficult to trace funds. I could feel eyes on me from every direction, but I didn't look away, because I knew exactly where the truth led. And in your professional opinion, the prosecutor asked, what does that indicate? I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I understood the weight of it. Then I spoke. Intent, I said. One word. Clear. Deliberate. The courtroom went still again. Because intent changes everything. It turns confusion into purpose, mistakes into decisions. The defense stepped forward quickly. "Ms. Thornton," he said, his tone sharper, "now you're describing a system that could apply to countless corporations. Are you suggesting that Thornton Holdings is intentionally engaging in misconduct?" I met his gaze. "I'm stating that the structure they're using," I said calmly, "matches one I've seen before. And that alone is enough for you to draw conclusions," he pressed. "No," I said, "but the data is." A murmur moved through the room. The prosecutor stepped in again. "Your Honor, we would like to present Exhibit 14. A series of documents appeared on the screen: financial records, transaction logs, account flows. Even from where I sat, I recognized the patterns immediately, because I had seen them before. Years ago. Different names, different faces, same method." "Miss Thornton," the prosecutor said, "do these records align with your previous testimony?" I leaned forward slightly, studying the documents. "Yes," I said. The defense exhaled slowly, clearly recalibrating. Because this wasn't going the way they had expected. Not anymore. From the corner of my eye, I saw Charles Whitmore shift in his seat. Subtle, but noticeable. He leaned toward one of the attorneys, whispering something under his breath. Concern had turned into calculation. And calculation meant one thing. They knew this was serious. The questioning continued. Detailed, precise, relentless, and I answered everything. Not emotionally, not defensively, but with the quiet certainty of someone who didn't need to prove anything, because the facts spoke for themselves. At one point, the prosecutor paused, then asked something different. "Ms. Thornton," he said, "why did you leave your legal career after your previous case?" The question hung in the air. Unexpected, personal. The defense didn't object. Because they were curious, too. Everyone was. I considered the answer carefully. Because this wasn't just about facts anymore. It was about truth. "I chose to," I said. "That's not very specific," the prosecutor said gently. "No," I agreed. "It's not." A faint ripple of tension moved through the room. I glanced briefly toward the gallery, toward the people watching, toward the space where, if things had gone differently, my family might have been sitting. But they weren't there. Not yet. I left. I continued because I believed my family needed me more than my career did. The words settled heavily. Not dramatic, just real. The prosecutor nodded. "And do you regret that decision?" he asked. For the first time since I had taken the stand, I hesitated, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I understood how complicated it was. "No," I said finally. And that was the truth, even now, even after everything, because regret isn't always about the choice. Sometimes it's about what comes after. The defense stepped forward again. "Ms. Thornton," he said, "you've made it clear that you haven't practiced law in years. Would you agree that financial systems evolve, that methods change over time?" "Yes," I said, "and that your experience, while impressive, may not fully reflect current practices." I held his gaze. "That would be true," I said. He nodded slightly, sensing an opening. "Then isn't it possible," he continued, "that what you're interpreting as misconduct is simply modernization?" The question was clever, framed to create doubt, to suggest that I was outdated, irrelevant. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Then I answered. "No," I said. The word landed clean, sharp, unwavering. "Why not?" he asked. Because modernization doesn't erase intent, I replied. It refines it. A quiet ripple moved through the room again. The defense paused. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because hesitation in a courtroom is everything. The judge leaned forward slightly. Ms. Thornton, he said, based on your testimony, do you believe the actions in this case are deliberate? I met his gaze directly. Yes, Your Honor, I said. There was no room for interpretation now. No ambiguity, just truth. The judge nodded once, then looked down at his notes. Very well, he said. We will recess for 10 minutes. The gavel struck lightly, and just like that, the tension broke, but only on the surface, because underneath, everything had changed. People stood. Conversations began in hushed tones. Lawyers gathered voices low and urgent. I stepped down from the stand slowly. Not rushed, not uncertain, just steady. As I moved toward the side of the courtroom, I felt it again. That shift, that quiet, undeniable recognition, not just from the room, but from myself, because this wasn't about reclaiming something I had lost. It was about remembering something I had always been. And as I reached the hallway outside, the noise of the courtroom fading behind me, one thought settled clearly in my mind. This wasn't over. Not even close. Because what I had revealed today was only the beginning. The hallway outside the courtroom was louder than it should have been, not in volume, but in tension. Clusters of attorneys stood close together, voices low and urgent. Assistants hurried past with files pressed tightly against their chests. Phones rang, footsteps echoed, doors opened and closed with quiet insistence. Everything moved. Everything reacted. Because something inside that courtroom had shifted, and everyone could feel it. I stood near one of the tall windows, looking out at the city below. From this height, everything seemed smaller, controlled, manageable. It was an illusion. Behind me, I heard footsteps approach, measured, deliberate. I didn't turn right away. I didn't need to. I wondered how long it would take before you came back. A fate would take before you came back, a familiar voice said. I turned slowly. Michael Hayes stood a few feet away, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp as ever. Time had aged him, yes, but not softened him. Michael, I said. A faint smile crossed his face. Still the same familiar voice said. I turned slowly. Michael Hayes stood a few feet away, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp as ever. Time had aged him, yes, but not softened him. Michael, I said. A faint smile crossed his face. Still the same, he said. Walk into a room and change everything without raising your voice. I almost smiled. You always did exaggerate, I replied. Not about this, he said quietly. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Years of shared history sitting silently between us. You got my letter, he said. I did, and you came anyway. There was something in his tone, respect, but also relief. I needed to see it for myself, I said. He nodded once. Good, he said, because it's worse than it looks. That didn't surprise me. What aren't they saying, I asked. Michael exhaled slowly, glancing briefly around us before stepping a little closer. They're not just moving money, he said. They're burying it. I felt my focus sharpen. Through subsidiaries, I asked, and shell accounts, he confirmed. Layered transactions, foreign transfers. It's sophisticated. Yes, I said quietly. It would have to be. He studied my expression. You recognize it? He said. I do, and I met his gaze. It's the same foundation, I said. Just refined. Michael let out a breath, as if that confirmed something he had already suspected. That's what I was afraid of, he said. A pause settled between us. Then he asked the question that mattered. Did you know who you'd be testifying against? I didn't answer immediately, because the truth had layers. I knew the company, I said, not the connection. His eyes narrowed slightly. What connection? He asked. I held his gaze. My daughter-in-law, I said. It's her family's business. For the first time since I had seen him again, Michael looked genuinely surprised. You're serious? He asked. I am. He ran a hand over his face briefly. Well, he said, that complicates things. Yes, I replied. It does. He studied me more carefully now. This isn't just professional for you anymore, he said. No, I agreed. It isn't. Michael nodded slowly, processing it. You still want to continue? He asked. The question wasn't about legality. It was about everything else. Family, consequences, what this would cost. I didn't hesitate. Yes. The answer came from somewhere deep, somewhere that had been quiet for years, but not gone. Michael gave a small, almost approving nod. Good, he said. Because they're going to push back harder now. I expect that, I said. They'll question your credibility, he continued. Your absence from the field, your motives. I almost smiled. They already have, I said. And they'll keep doing it, he added, especially once they realize how much you actually know. I turned, slightly glancing back toward the courtroom doors. I don't think they've realized that yet, I said. Michael followed my gaze. No, he said quietly. But they will. Another pause. Then his voice lowered. There's something else, he said. I looked back at him. What they tried to keep you off this case, he said. The words didn't surprise me, but hearing them confirmed mattered. How I asked. Delayed the notice, he said. Misfiled documents. Tried to argue your testimony wasn't relevant. I nodded slowly. That explains the timing, I said. Michael's expression tightened. They knew your name, he said. Before you even walked in. Of course they did. They've been preparing for you, he added. I met his gaze. So have I said. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Yeah, he said quietly. You have? A door opened behind us, the signal that recess was ending. People began moving again, returning to their places, their roles, their strategies. Michael straightened slightly. This next part won't be as straightforward, he said. They're going to try to discredit everything you've said. I know, I replied. And if they can't discredit you, he continued, they'll try to redirect the narrative. I tilted my head slightly. To what? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at me in a way that felt cautious. Personal bias, he said finally. Conflict of interest. I understood immediately. They'll use Rebecca, I said. Yes, of course they would. It was the obvious move. Turn my connection into a weakness. Turn truth into motive. They'll say you're targeting the company because of family issues, he added. I nodded once. Let them, I said. Michael raised an eyebrow slightly. "You're not concerned?" I met his gaze. "No," I said, "because it's not true. And in a courtroom, truth still mattered. At least it was supposed to." Michael studied me for another moment. Then a small smile appeared. "God, I've missed this," he said. I almost laughed. "Missed what?" I asked. "This," he said, gesturing slightly toward me. "You when you're like this." I shook my head lightly. "I never stopped being like this," I said. "I know," he replied. "You just stopped showing it. That was true. For a long time. But not anymore." The bailiff's voice echoed down the hallway. "All parties return to the courtroom." Michael took a step back. "Ready?" he asked. I looked at the door, at the space where everything would continue, where the truth would either hold or be challenged. "I am," I said, and for the first time in years, I meant it completely. Because whatever came next, I wasn't walking into it as someone diminished. I wasn't walking into it as someone overlooked. I was walking into it as Amelia Thornton. And that changed everything. When we stepped back into the courtroom, the energy had changed again. Not quieter, not calmer, sharper, more focused. Because now everyone understood what was at stake. Not just a case, not just a company, but credibility, reputation, truth. I returned to my seat at the witness stand, my posture steady, my hands resting lightly in front of me. Across the room, I saw Charles Whitmore speaking urgently with the defense team. Whatever composure he had maintained earlier was thinning. Good. The judge re-entered and the room rose once more before settling back into place. "Proceed," he said. The defense stood first this time. Of course they did. They needed to regain control. "Ms. Thornton." The lead attorney began, his tone measured but noticeably tighter than before. "I'd like to revisit your connection to this case. Here it comes." "Of course," I said. He paced slowly in front of the jury. "You testified that Thornton Holdings belongs to your daughter-in-law's family. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And that your son is married to her?" "Yes." He stopped walking and turned to face me. "So you have a direct personal relationship to the individuals whose company is under investigation?" "I do." He nodded slightly, as if confirming a point. "Would you agree that such a relationship could create bias?" There it was. The strategy Michael had warned me about. I met his gaze. "No," I said. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "No," he repeated. "No," I said again. "Because my testimony is based on evidence, not personal feelings." He tilted his head slightly. "But personal feelings can influence interpretation," he pressed, "especially in complex financial matters." I remained still. "Not when the patterns are clear," I replied. He took a step closer. "Or when there's a motive," he added. The word hung in the air. Motive, a dangerous word. And what motive would that be? I asked calmly. He didn't hesitate. "Resentment," he said. A ripple moved through the room. Subtle, but present. "Toward your daughter-in-law," he continued. "Toward her family. Toward the company that, by your own admission, you were not involved in." I let the silence stretch for a moment. Then I spoke. "You're assuming I need a motive to tell the truth," I said. The defense attorney paused. "Just slightly, but enough. I'm suggesting that your personal circumstances could influence your perspective," he corrected. I leaned forward slightly. "My personal circumstances?" I said evenly, "have nothing to do with whether or not those financial records are accurate." He didn't respond immediately, because he knew that was true. and truth is difficult to argue against. He shifted tactics. Let's talk about your absence from the legal field, he said. You left your career years ago. You've had no active involvement in modern financial litigation since then. Correct? Correct. So how can you claim to understand current systems well enough to make these conclusions? The same angle, different wording. I had expected it. Because the core structure hasn't changed, I said. Only the complexity around it. And you're certain of that? He asked. Yes. How? I held his gaze. Because people don't change as much as they think they do. I said, they just find more sophisticated ways to do the same things. A quiet murmur spread again. The defense attorney turned slightly as if considering his next move. Then he did something unexpected. Ms. Thornton, he said, isn't it true that you've been living in your son's home for the past several months? The question seemed unrelated. But it wasn't. Yes, I said. And during that time, he continued, you were not employed. You had no active professional role. You were dependent on your family. The word hung there. Dependent. I could feel eyes shifting again, watching, judging, measuring. Yes, I said. He nodded as if that confirmed something. So, you went from leading major federal cases to having no professional identity at all. A pause. Then, and now suddenly, you reappear in a case that directly impacts your daughter-in-law's family. He let the implication sit. Heavy, deliberate. You expect this court to believe that's just a coincidence? The room felt tighter, more focused, because this wasn't about facts anymore. This was about perception. And perception could be dangerous. I didn't rush my answer. I let the silence build, because sometimes silence is more powerful than words. Then I spoke. I didn't come looking for this case, I said. It found me. The defense raised an eyebrow. That's a convenient explanation, he said. It's the truth, I replied. He shook his head slightly, or perhaps he said it's an opportunity. I tilted my head. For what? For relevance, he said. For recognition. For restoring something you lost. The words were sharp, calculated, designed to provoke. But they didn't, because he was wrong. I didn't need restoration. I had never lost myself. I didn't lose anything, I said quietly. The room stilled again, because something in my voice had changed. Not louder, not stronger, but deeper, more certain. The defense attorney hesitated, just for a moment. Then he pressed on. Then why now? He asked. I met his gaze. Because now it matters, I said. And it didn't matter before he challenged. It did, I said. But I made a different choice. What choice? He asked. I paused, then answered. I chose my family. The words settled into the room. Simple, uncomplicated, but powerful. And now? He asked. I held his gaze. Now I said, I'm choosing the truth. Silence, complete, unbroken, because in that moment, there was nothing left to argue. The defense stepped back slowly, not defeated, but quieter, less certain. The judge leaned forward slightly. Counsel, he said. The defense attorney hesitated, then shook his head. No further questions, he said, and just like that, the momentum shifted again. The prosecutor stood, stepping forward with a renewed sense of purpose. Ms. Thornton, he said, just one final clarification. I nodded. You've testified that the structure used by Thornton Holdings mirrors one you've seen before. Based on your experience, what happens when such a structure is left unchecked? I didn't hesitate. It grows, I said, and eventually, he pressed. I looked directly at the judge. It collapses, I said. The word echoed, not loudly, but clearly, and everyone in that room understood what it meant. Because collapse doesn't just affect systems, it affects people, families, lives. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you, Miss Thornton, he said. And as I stepped down from the stand once more, I felt it again. That shift, that quiet, undeniable change. Because this wasn't just about proving something anymore. It was about revealing it. And once truth is revealed, it can't be hidden again. The courtroom didn't settle after that exchange. It shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that everyone could feel. Because once doubt cracks, it doesn't disappear. It spreads. And now the defense wasn't just protecting a company. They were trying to contain damage. The judge adjusted his glasses, glancing between both sides before speaking. We will proceed with the next witness, he said. But even as the process moved forward, I could feel it. Eyes still drifting toward me. Conversation still circling back to what I had said. Because truth once spoken doesn't stay in one place. It lingers. It grows. I stepped away from the stand and returned to the side seating area, my posture calm, my mind clear. This part of the process wasn't about me speaking. It was about what came next. And what came next was evidence. The prosecution called their forensic analyst, a younger woman, sharp-composed, carrying a stack of documents that looked heavier than they should have. Not physically, but in meaning. She took the stand, was sworn in, and began walking the court through the financial records. Line by line, transaction by transaction, patterns, connections, hidden trails. And as she spoke, something became undeniable. Everything I had said was being confirmed. Not emotionally, not interpretively, but factually. Cold, structured, undeniable fact. I watched as the screen displayed diagrams, flowcharts of money moving through layers of accounts, looping back in ways that made no legitimate business sense. And I saw it again. That familiar structure. That same design. Only this time, it was bigger, more complex, more dangerous. The defense objected several times. Technicalities, language, presentation. But each objection felt weaker than the last, because the facts were stacking, higher, heavier, impossible to ignore. At one point, the prosecutor turned slightly toward me. Ms. Thornton, he said, would you like to clarify how this structure compares to the one you previously described? The judge nodded, allowing it. I stood again, returning to the stand. This, I said, gesturing lightly toward the screen, is an evolution. The room quieted immediately. Not a different system, I continued. A refined one. The analyst nodded slightly. And what does that mean? The prosecutor asked. It means they learned from past exposure, I said. They adjusted, strengthened weak points, created more distance between transactions. The DFE NSE rose quickly. Objection, speculation. It means they learned from past exposure, I said. They adjusted, strengthened weak points, created more distance between transactions. The defense rose quickly. Objection, speculation. The judge considered for a moment. Overruled, he said. The witness has established relevant expertise. I continued. But the core remains the same, I said. And the core is what matters. Because no matter how sophisticated something becomes, if the foundation is flawed, it will show. The questioning moved forward. More documents. More explanations. More confirmation. And slowly, piece by piece, The defense's position began to narrow. Not collapse yet, but tighten, restrict. Because they were running out of room to argue. Then something unexpected happened. The prosecutor paused, looked at the judge, then said, "Your Honor, we would like to call one final witness." A ripple moved through the room. Final witness. That meant this was nearing its turning point. "Proceed," the judge said. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and for a moment I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then I did. Rebecca. She stepped inside slowly, her posture rigid, her expression carefully controlled, but her eyes were different, not confident, not composed, uncertain. Behind her, Daniel followed. He looked worse, tired, worried, caught between something he didn't fully understand yet. And suddenly, everything shifted again. Because this wasn't just about the courtroom anymore. This was about us. Rebecca was sworn in her movements precise, but slightly delayed, like someone forcing control back into their body. She took the stand, and for the first time since I had known her. She didn't look in control. The prosecutor approached carefully. "Ms. Whitmore," he began, "can you confirm your role within Thornton Holdings?" "I'm a senior executive," she said. Her voice was steady, but only just. "And your responsibilities include oversight of financial operations." "Yes. Are you familiar with the transaction structures presented earlier in this court?" A pause. Small, but noticeable. "Yes," she said. The prosecutor nodded. "And can you explain their purpose?" Rebecca hesitated. "Just for a second. But in a courtroom, a second is everything. They are part of our asset management strategy," she said. The answer was rehearsed. Careful, controlled, but I could hear it. The slight strain beneath it. The prosecutor stepped closer. "Are you aware of any irregularities within those structures?" he asked. "No," she said quickly, too quickly. The prosecutor didn't react, but the room did, because speed in a moment like that raises questions. "None at all?" he asked. Rebecca's jaw tightened. "None that I'm aware of," she corrected. "Better, but not enough." The prosecutor turned slightly. "Ms. Thornton," he said, "you've heard this testimony. Based on your analysis, do you agree the judge allowed it?" I stood slowly, walked back to the stand. And for the first time since this began, Rebecca and I faced each other directly. No distance, no avoidance, just truth. "No," I said. The word landed quietly, but it carried. The prosecutor nodded. "Can you explain why I didn't look away from Rebecca?" "Because awareness isn't the same as responsibility," I said. A silence fell over the room, heavier than before. And in this case, I continued. "The patterns are too consistent, too deliberate to be accidental." Rebecca's eyes flickered. Just slightly, but I saw it. Fear. Real fear. The prosecutor stepped back. No further questions. The defense rose immediately. Of course they did. They had to. But something had changed, because now it wasn't just about documents, or structures, or patterns. It was about people, choices, responsibility. And as Rebecca sat there under the same lights I had stood beneath earlier, I realized something with absolute clarity. This was the moment she had never prepared for. Not the business side, not the strategy, not the control, but the truth. And truth doesn't negotiate. There is a moment in every trial when everything stops being theoretical. When arguments, strategies, and carefully crafted narratives fall away. And only truth remains. We had reached that moment. Rebecca sat on the stand, her posture still upright, her expression still controlled, but the cracks were no longer subtle. They were visible. Her hands, resting lightly in her lap, were too still. Her breathing just slightly too measured. Her eyes no longer scanning the room with confidence, but fixed on something deeper. Calculation had turned into survival. The defense attorney approached her slowly. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, his voice calm but deliberate. "You've testified that you were unaware of any irregularities in your company's financial structures. Is that correct?" "Yes," she said. The word came out clean. "Practiced, but not strong." "And you stand by that statement?" he asked. "I do." He nodded. "Let's review a few documents then." The screen lit up again. This time emails, internal communications, dates, times, names, Rebecca's name. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, "can you confirm that this email address belongs to you?" She looked at the screen. A pause. "Yes." And that at the screen. A pause. "Yes." And that you sent this message on March 14th of last year? Another pause. "Yes." The prosecutor didn't rush, didn't press. He let the silence breathe. Then, "Would you please read the highlighted section aloud? You sent this message on March 14th of last year?" Another pause. "Yes." The prosecutor didn't rush, didn't press. He let the silence breathe. Then, "Would you please read the highlighted section aloud?" Rebecca's eyes moved across the screen. I watched her, not the words, her, because sometimes the truth shows itself before it's spoken. Her jaw tightened, her fingers curled slightly, but she read. "Make sure the secondary accounts are routed through the Cayman structure before the audit window opens." The words settled into the room like something heavy, something undeniable. The prosecutor nodded. "Thank you," he said. Then he stepped closer. "Ms. Whitmore, can you explain what you meant by secondary accounts?" Rebecca didn't answer immediately, because there was no safe answer. "They're internal allocations," she said finally. The prosecutor tilted his head. "And the Cayman structure, standard offshore holdings," she replied, controlled, careful, but thinner now. Much thinner. The prosecutor didn't challenge her directly. Instead, he turned slightly. "Ms. Thornton," he said, "based on your experience, can you interpret that statement?" The judge allowed it. I stood again, walked back to the stand, and for the third time that day, I faced Rebecca. She didn't look at me this time, not directly. "Secondary accounts," I said calmly, "typically refer to undisclosed financial channels, accounts not included in primary reporting." The room was silent. "Routing them through offshore structures," I continued, "is a common method of obscuring ownership and movement." The prosecutor nodded. "And in your professional opinion, I didn't hesitate. That language indicates intent to conceal," I said. The word hit harder this time, because now it wasn't just theory. It was her words, her actions, her responsibility. The defense stepped in quickly. "Objection interpretation." The judge paused, then overruled, he said. Rebecca's composure slipped. Just slightly, but enough. The defense shifted strategy immediately. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, "can you clarify whether those instructions were part of standard corporate procedure?" "Yes," she said quickly. "They were." But her voice, it wasn't steady anymore. The prosecutor moved again. "Standard procedure," he repeated, "to route undisclosed accounts through offshore entities before an audit." Rebecca swallowed. "Yes." The word came out weaker this time, because even she could hear it. How it sounded. The prosecutor didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, "are you aware that such actions violate federal financial regulations?" A pause, longer this time. The entire room waited, because this was the line. "Yes," she said finally, barely above a whisper. And just like that, everything changed. The defense didn't object. They couldn't, because she had said it herself. The prosecutor stepped back slightly. No rush, no pressure, just certainty. "Your Honor," he said, "the prosecution rests." The words echoed, clear, final. And suddenly, there was nowhere left to hide. The defense stood slowly. No confidence now, no sharp edge, just necessity. They called no additional witnesses, presented no new evidence, because there was nothing left to present. The structure had been exposed, the intent had been confirmed, and the responsibility had been admitted. The judge leaned forward, his expression serious, measured. "I will take a brief recess before delivering my ruling," he said. The gavel struck, and just like that, it was over. Not officially, not yet, but everyone in that room knew. The outcome wasn't uncertain anymore. It was inevitable. People began to stand. Voices returned in low murmurs. Movement filled the space again. But I remained where I was, still, quiet, watching. Because this wasn't just the end of a case. It was the end of something else. A version of reality that had been carefully maintained, carefully controlled. Rebecca stood slowly from the witness stand. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't look at anyone. Then, her eyes found mine, across the room. No anger, no arrogance, just understanding. And something else, something I hadn't expected. Regret. Daniel stepped toward her, his face pale, his expression shaken. He looked at her, then at me, then back again, as if trying to piece together a reality that no longer made sense, and for the first time since this began. He didn't stand beside her. He stood apart. That hurt. More than anything else. Not because I wanted him to choose me, but because I knew what it meant. Everything was breaking. And some things don't go back together the same way. The courtroom doors opened again, the signal that the judge was returning. Everyone took their places. The room settled. And in that silence, I realized something with complete clarity. This wasn't about winning. It never had been. It was about truth. And truth always comes with a cost. The courtroom fell into a silence so complete it almost felt unreal. Not the quiet of calm, but the quiet of impact. The judge returned his expression unchanged, measured, composed, unreadable. Yet something in the room had already decided what his words would be. We all stood, and then we sat again. After reviewing the testimony, the evidence presented, and the admissions made under oath, he began his voice, steady, deliberate. No one moved. No one spoke. Even breathing felt noticeable. This court finds sufficient evidence to conclude that Thornton Holdings engaged in deliberate financial misconduct. The words landed like something heavy and final, not explosive, not dramatic, just undeniable. Rebecca didn't react immediately. She sat still, her gaze fixed forward, as if she hadn't fully processed what had just been said. Daniel, however, he did. I saw it in the way his shoulders dropped slightly, in the way his eyes closed for just a moment, as if something inside him had finally broken. The judge continued. Further proceedings will determine the extent of legal consequences and financial penalties. However, based on the current findings, he paused, and in that pause, the entire room held its breath. Responsibility rests with those who directed and authorized these actions. There it was, no longer implied, no longer debated, stated, clear. Rebecca's fingers tightened in her lap, not dramatically, but enough, because she understood. Better than anyone. The judge's gavel came down softly. This court is adjourned. And just like that, it was over. Not the aftermath, not the consequences, but the illusion. The room came back to life slowly. People stood, papers shuffled, voices returned low and careful. But for me, everything felt strangely still. Because I wasn't focused on the outcome. I was focused on what came after. Rebecca stood slowly. For a moment, she looked smaller. Not physically, but in presence. The confidence she had carried so effortlessly was gone. She turned. And this time, she walked toward me. Daniel followed, hesitant, uncertain, caught in the space between us. Rebecca stopped just a few feet away, close enough that I could see everything she wasn't saying. Her pride, her fear, her regret. You knew, she said quietly, not accusing, not angry, just stating it. I held her gaze. Yes, I said. A pause. Then, you could have warned me, she said. The words were soft, but they carried weight. I tilted my head slightly. Would you have listened? I asked. She didn't answer. Because she knew the truth. No. She wouldn't have. Daniel stepped forward slightly. Mom, he said. His voice broke on the word. And that hurt more than anything else. Not the insults, not the silence, but this. The realization in his voice. The understanding that had come too late. I didn't know, he said. I swear I didn't know. I believed him. That was the hardest part. I know, I said gently. He looked at me then. Really looked. For the first time in a long time. I should have listened to you, he said. I should have asked. Paid attention. He stopped, because there were no words big enough to fix what had been broken. Rebecca exhaled slowly. This isn't over, she said. Her voice was steadier now. Not strong, but rebuilding. There will be appeals, legal strategies. This doesn't just end like this. She was right. Of course she was. But that wasn't what mattered anymore. Maybe not, I said. But the truth doesn't change. She looked at me for a long moment. And this time, there was no resistance in her eyes. No superiority. Just recognition. Of who I was. Of who I had always been. I misjudged you, she said finally. Simple, direct, honest. I nodded slightly. Yes, I said. No anger, no satisfaction. Just truth. Daniel stepped closer. Mom, please, he said. Come home. The words hung in the air, heavy, complicated, because home didn't mean the same thing anymore. I looked at him, at the man he had become, at the boy I had raised, at the distance between those two versions. I will, I said. Relief flashed across his face, too quickly, too soon. But not to live, I added gently. The relief faded, replaced by understanding. Slow, painful, real. I need my own space now. I said. My own life. Rebecca didn't argue. Daniel didn't push. Because they both knew something had changed. Permanently. I'm not leaving, Ad changed. Permanently. I'm not leaving because of anger, I continued. I'm leaving because I finally remembered who I am. Silence settled between us again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was clear. Rebecca nodded once. I understand, she said, and for the first time, I believed her. Daniel stepped back slightly, not distancing himself, but giving me space, something he hadn't done in a long time. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I looked at him, and I saw it. Not just guilt, growth, the beginning of it at least. I know, I said, and I meant that too. Because forgiveness doesn't always come with forgetting, but it can come with understanding. I turned then, walking toward the exit of the courtroom, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving forward. Behind me I could hear them, not following, not stopping me, just watching. And as I stepped out into the hallway, into the light that felt different now, brighter, clearer mine, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. Respect isn't something you demand. It isn't something you wait for. It's something you carry. Quietly. Consistently. Unshakably. And once you remember that, no one can take it from you again. The first night in my new apartment was quieter than I expected. Not lonely, not empty, just quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't press in on you, but instead gives you space to hear your own thoughts again. Boxes still lined the walls, half unpacked. A single lamp cast a soft glow across the room, and outside the distant hum of the city carried on as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I stood by the window, holding a cup of tea I had forgotten to drink, watching the lights flicker across the buildings in the distance. For years, I had built my life around others. My career, my son, my family. And somewhere along the way, I had convinced myself that stepping back meant losing something. But standing there now, I understood. I hadn't lost anything. I had simply paused. There was a soft knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment, I just stood there considering whether to answer. Then I set the cup down and walked over. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there, alone. He looked different, not just tired, not just worn down, but humbled. Hi, Mom, he said quietly. I stepped aside without a word, letting him in. He moved slowly, taking in the space, the simplicity, the stillness. It's nice, he said. It's mine, I replied. He nodded. I can see that. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. I didn't come to argue, he said finally. I know. I came because... He stopped, exhaling slowly. Because I didn't recognize what I was becoming. That caught my attention. I turned to face him fully. What do you mean? I asked. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. I thought I was building a life, he said. A successful one. A stable one. I thought supporting Rebecca, trusting her family, going along with everything, it was the right thing. He looked at me, but I stopped asking questions, he continued. I stopped listening. Not just to you, to myself. I didn't interrupt, because this mattered. And when everything came out in court, he said, his voice tightening, I realized I wasn't just unaware. I was complicit in a way. Not unaware. I was complicit in a way. Not legally, but personally. There it was. The truth. The kind that doesn't come easily. I chose comfort over truth, he said. I studied him carefully. Not judging. not correcting, just legally but personally. There it was, the truth, the kind that doesn't come easily. I chose comfort over truth, he said. I studied him carefully, not judging, not correcting, just listening. That's a hard thing to admit, I said. It is, he replied. A small, sad smile crossed his face. But you taught me to face hard things, he added. I felt something shift inside me. Not pride, not exactly, but something close. What about Rebecca? I asked gently. He hesitated, longer this time. She's fighting it. I felt something shift inside me. Not pride, not exactly, but something close. What about Rebecca? I asked gently. He hesitated, longer this time. She's fighting it, he said. Legally, emotionally, all of it. And you? He looked at me. I don't know if I can stand beside that anymore, he said. That was the moment, not dramatic, not loud, but decisive, because walking away from something, especially something you've built your life around, is never easy. She made choices, he continued, and I kept defending them without really understanding them. He exhaled slowly. I don't want to do that anymore. The room fell quiet again, but this time it felt different, lighter, more honest. I'm not asking you to fix anything, he said. I know I can't undo what's been done. I nodded. You're right, I said, but I want to do better, he added, starting now. I held his gaze, and for the first time in a long time, I saw not just my son, but a man learning, growing, facing himself, and that mattered more than anything else. Then start with the truth, I said. I will, he replied. A pause. Then, can we try again? He asked. The question wasn't simple. It wasn't easy. Because rebuilding something requires more than words. It requires time, trust, consistency. But it also requires something else. Willingness. Yes, I said. Relief washed over his face. Not overwhelming, but real. Thank you, he said quietly. I nodded once. We'll take it one step at a time, I added. I understand. He moved toward the door, pausing before he opened it. I'm proud of you, he said. The words surprised me, not because I didn't believe them, but because I hadn't expected to hear them from him. Thank you, I said softly. He gave a small nod. Then he left. And just like that, the space was quiet again, but not the same quiet as before. This time, it carried something new, possibility. I returned to the window, picking up my cup of tea. It was cold now. I didn't mind, because warmth wasn't something I needed to find in the cup anymore. It was something I felt, inside, in the clarity of everything that had happened, in the truth that had come to light, in the understanding that respect isn't something others give you. It's something you live, every day, in every choice. And as I stood there, looking out at the city that felt both familiar and new, I realized something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. No matter how long it takes, no matter how far you step away, you can always return to who you truly are. And when you do, the world doesn't just see you differently. You see yourself clearly for the first time. There comes a point in life when we begin to question the value we've placed on ourselves, not because we've changed, but because the world around us has slowly convinced us to shrink. We give our time, our energy, our identity to the people we love. We step back. We compromise. We adapt. And sometimes, without realizing it, we begin to believe that our worth is tied to how others see us. But the truth is, it never was. Respect is not something you earn through silence. It is not something you receive by diminishing yourself for the comfort of others. It is something you carry within you, steady, quiet, unshakable. Amelia's journey is not just about a courtroom or a family conflict. It's about remembering who you are when the world forgets. It's about standing in your truth, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs you something. Because it will cost you something. Truth always does. But what it gives you in return is something no one can take away. Clarity, strength, and the freedom to live as your full self. If this story resonated with you, I would truly love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had a moment where you had to stand up for yourself, even when it was difficult? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else. And if you believe in stories about strength, truth, and second chances, don't forget to like and subscribe. Wherever you're watching from, let me know your city and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing where these stories reach. You are not alone, and it is never too late to reclaim your voice.